One.
Hi, Allison here. Time to get down to some actual stitching of Sashiko. So the simplest place to start are these pre-printed samples. They come from Japan. They have the traditional designs on them. And if you look closely, you can see that the stitches are actually printed on here. So what you're doing is you're pulling your thread up and you're just going with the white thread going where the printed stitch is shown. With a magnifying glass, you can see that they're actually going to tell you, stitch this row first, stitch all the way across second, all the way from side to side, and the numbers will be on there. Sashiko is generally a continuous line design, and it's going to work from one side to the other of the design. You can also find things like this, and this is from Japan, where the stitches are all printed, and here it's indicated that this would be in one color, a gold, and this other part would be in white. If you look and compare Sashiko stitching, and this I've done freehand without any printed lines on it, and hand quilting. You can see that in hand quilting there are maybe 8 stitches to the inch, where in Sashiko there are maybe 4 stitches to the inch. So they're about twice as big as the hand stitching stitches. What you're trying to do is get perfectly even stitches the size of a grain of rice, and you want the space to be about half the size of a grain of rice. Now you can see, if you look carefully, that there are places where it's not perfectly straight, where my stitches are not perfectly symmetrical in size, but if you pan back a little bit, really what you're looking at is the overall effect. So don't get hooked on perfection to the point where you never get anything finished. Perfect is the enemy of the good. What we're going to do now is, in an overblown size, I'm going to show you how to lock your stitches in the beginning and the end. I have a Sashiko needle, which is a nice long needle with a very large eye. I have my Sashiko thread, which is a single strand cotton thread, and even with the big eye, you can see that I could trim but still have a hard time getting that thread into that eye. I like to use my little Sashiko needle threader. You can see that I've actually tied it to the button on my needle holder case because it is so small it's easy to lose. That way I can always find it, and I put the needle threader through the eye of the needle, pinching the thread between my fingers. I catch it on that hook, and then I pull the thread through the eye of the needle. I double it over so that it won't come untied. What I'm going to do now is stitch, leave a tail on the back, stitch 1 stitch and a space, and then turn my fabric around. So I come up from the back, I'm leaving a tail on the back, I stitch. Now this is an oversized stitch, but I've stitched 1 stitch and a space, pull my tail out a little bit more so that I don't lose it. Now I'm going to spin my fabric around and head in the other direction. I'm going to complete that stitch, come back up next to my first stitch with my needle right in almost underneath that first stitch. Again, this is oversized, so it's easy for you to see. Now I'm going to go back underneath that first stitch into the fabric, leave a space, do another stitch and another stitch, and now you can see that even though I've done all this oversized, It's visible but not glaringly visible that I've doubled over my stitch. And that's all you need to do to lock your stitches in. If I were working on this design, where I have used the iron off pounce to stitch my stitches, I would start on a corner and I would head in this direction for my beginning stitch and come back this way and stitch to the other side. If I still had thread, I would continue on, and when I stop, I'm going to reverse this method. So I'll show you that. Then I'm going to say I'm continuing to stitch, and now I'm finished stitching and I want to secure my thread. I'm going to turn my fabric around in the opposite direction, do my last stitch and come up next to my first stitch, go down right next to that first, get all that thread out of the way so you can see it, right next to that first stitch, this time leaving my thread and my needle on the back. Going to then turn my fabric over and use my needle to weave the thread into those stitches, and then I can just snip it off right there. Do you remember I said I had a small crochet hook? This is what I use this for. I use it to weave my stitches into the back here. And that, even though it's not going to show through on the dark fabric, that just gives it all a nice, neat appearance when it's finished. And that's how I do the stitching.